Java was built by volcanoes. In the middle of the island, molten lava, still below ground, makes spring water steam and bubble. This place, where the forces of nature demonstrate their power so dramatically, is holy. And here, over 1,000 years ago, the Javanese built their first stone temples. They dedicated them to the god who, like the volcanoes, both creates and destroys, the Hindu god Shiva. Hinduism and Buddhism were both brought to Java from India sometime about the end of the 1st century. As temples for their new gods, the Javanese built mountains of stone symbolizing the universe and placed figures of the gods all around them. Some of the temples still tower majestically over the rice fields. Others, small and exquisite, nestle among groves of bamboo. These buildings, set up during the 8th century, mark the beginning of a golden age in Java, when the arts of architecture and sculpture, music and dancing reached marvelous heights. The sculptors decorated the temple walls with elegant panels, and in small cave-like chambers in these mountains of stone, they placed figures of holy men and of the gods themselves. The Buddha, his hand raised in blessing. The bull Nandi, which carried Shiva on his journeys. The traders who brought these religions from India also brought images of their gods, which served as models for the Javanese. This 4th century bronze Buddha, found in an island north of Java, was almost certainly one of them. But soon the Javanese were themselves producing their own versions. This one, cast in solid silver and showing the Buddha holding a lotus, dates from the 10th century. This was also made about the same time in Java. It represents a bodhisattva, one who has achieved enlightenment, but who has renounced it in order to return to the world and help suffering mankind. The Javanese sculptors also carved in stone another bodhisattva, his holiness apparent from the halo around his head. A monk, shaven-headed in meditation. And the Buddha himself, carved in stone and placed on the greatest Buddhist monument in all the world outside India, Borobudur. This temple, too, represents the cosmic mountain. Its upper terraces symbolize the heavens, where the Buddhist approaches his union with the infinite. Only in one place is his statue visible. Everywhere else, his image is hidden within the latticed walls of stone bells, stupas. And at the center, at the summit of the cosmic mountain, all individual personality has been purged. The biggest stupa of all is solid stone. Beneath the upper celestial levels, which represent the enlightenment found by the Buddha, there are long galleries richly carved with friezes showing life as it's lived on earth. The belief that the universe is shaped like a mountain, and the idea of building temples to symbolize it in such a form, came originally, like the gods themselves, from India. And there you can still find the prototypes. On the east coast, at the ancient settlement of Mahabalipuram, Temple mountains still stand by the shore. Once, Mahabalipuram was a large trading port, one of the busiest in all India. The Greeks knew of it in the 1st century AD, and so did the Romans. Here, 2,000 years ago, great merchant ships weighed anchor to set off across the Indian Ocean to the islands of Indonesia that lay 1,000 miles away to the east, and which were rich with gold and spices. Today, the fishermen don't venture far from the shore, but the ancient temples still remain. Many of the temples have been cut into the solid rock. These are dedicated to Shiva. Close to the shore, a shrine dedicated to Durga, the wife of Shiva in her most fearsome aspect, who is shown on a frieze fighting Mahishasura, a buffalo-headed demon. Shiva is also lord of the animals, Pashupati, and images of them swarm over the rocks and the cliffs. The Hindu gods in their temple mountains were worshipped from the earliest times by dancing. The gods themselves were dancers. Shiva created the world by dancing, standing on a demon, shaking a hand drum, and moving his body to the rhythm of its beat, so that the world materialized around him. Since then, people have danced in his temples in order to invoke him and the other gods, and to please them. These dance traditions, together with Indian ways of building temples, traveled to Java, and here they have flourished ever since. The movements of Javanese dancers clearly derive from Indian traditions, but their gestures are much more restrained. For the Javanese, 500 years ago, abandoned the Hindu faith in favor of another religion that came to them by way of India, Islam. Islam is a severe and Puritan faith. Its influence curbed the sensuality and eroticism of the original Hindu dances and transformed them into something that is now uniquely Javanese. The Javanese architects also brought their own individual genius to the design of their temple mountains. Perhaps there is anyway in the Javanese character a desire for discipline and a taste for restraint, for these temples are not covered by crowds of figures sprawling all over the towers and walls as they do at Mahabalipuram and other Indian temples. Instead, they are carefully composed and set with inspired judgment in panels. The goddesses are not full-breasted and sensual like their Indian prototypes, but elegant and lissome. Nonetheless, the dances still tell Indian stories, the adventures of the great hero Rama, who wandered for 14 years with his wife Sita through the wilderness. And that story, too, is found in the temple sculptures. Sita, the faithful wife, is abducted by the servants of the demon king, Ravana. Rama pursues him. And eventually, using the gigantic bow that none but he could bend, he transfixes the demon king with an arrow. In the villages, the people regularly and enthusiastically enact dramas, telling the tales of ancient heroes. But just who they are is difficult to say, for many religious traditions are now intimately entwined in Java. These hobby horses hark back to ancient animistic trance dances. The characters with their heavy moustaches are Hindu heroes, and the people who portray them are themselves practicing Muslims. In this instance, the religious amalgam has an additional ingredient. The whole performance is being given as part of the celebrations for a great Buddhist festival at Borobudur. The number of practicing Buddhists in Java today is tiny, but Borobudur is so sacred a place to all Buddhists that many come from overseas to visit the monument. Every year, on the day of the full moon in May, a ceremony is held to commemorate the anniversary of the moment over 2,500 years ago, when the Buddha, sitting beneath the sacred Bodhi tree in India, attained enlightenment. The occasion this year at Borobudur is particularly important, for a seedling, derived, it's believed, directly from that ancient tree, has been brought by monks from Sri Lanka to be planted here. The most easily understood common language spoken by the Sri Lankan monks and the Indonesians is English.
It is now my pleasure and privilege to ask you, Your Excellency, on behalf of the government of Indonesia, to plant this blossom tree on this historic site.
The tiny seedling is blessed and given strength with holy water and showers of petals. After the tree had been planted, the monks, who had come from so far, reverently visited the monument. Before they climb to the holy terraces, their feet must be washed. Now they begin the first of the 9 circuits of the monument that all devout pilgrims should make. They walk clockwise, and the sculptures on the walls on their right, which in all run for almost 2 miles, tell the story of the Buddha's life, beginning with the descent of his spirit from heaven. These lower terraces show how he was born as a prince and spent his youth in luxury, hunting, feasting, dancing, and enjoying all the sensual pleasures of life. The sculptors who carved these panels inevitably used images from their own everyday lives to tell their story. So these friezes give a marvelously detailed picture not of India, but of Java in the 8th century. This was the kind of ship that must have brought the Indian traders to these shores.
perahu atau kapal yang model begini ya, itu cukup susah.
Iya.
Begitulah memang.
Atau ini lambang daripada Dhamma. Jadi
Yang ambil mirip dengan yang sana itu.
oh, yang
Ini
ini.
yang perahunya ini ya.
There are nearly 1,500 of these narrative panels. They served as a book to those who couldn't read, as texts for sermons to the monks who guided the faithful, and as a way of enabling the pilgrim himself to relive the life of the Lord Buddha as he walks past them. When the prince was 29, he left the palace in which he had spent his youth, and then he saw for the first time the sufferings of mankind. Horrified by the pain and sorrow that he found, he gave away his possessions, exchanged clothes with a beggar, and shaved his head. Then he started on a journey seeking wisdom that was to last 6 years. These panels illustrate his progress and fill it with miracles and supernatural episodes and frequent visitations of gods and goddesses who float down from heaven to watch over the Buddha to be. At last, the prince understood that the source of suffering was desire, and realized that man could only escape that suffering by purging himself of all desire and seeking the total extinction of his individual personality, nirvana. That realization is symbolically portrayed as the pilgrims leave the last of the friezes and emerge onto the upper terraces. For here, all representation of the earthly life and all ornament has disappeared. Here, they meditate.
Ia mampaku mayang bagawantang patanagata, ulisa babajita, yono bagawatata, ya sacamayang bagawato samang apasya.
Above them, only the heavens and the pure, simple shape of the topmost stupa. Here at last, through meditation, pilgrims may glimpse the ultimate truth.
Dhammang namasami.
An aerial view of the monument makes its symbolic design very clear. The 5 outer terraces are square and symbolize the earth. Above them rise 3 terraces in the shape of heaven, the circle. The whole integrates squares and circles and so forms the mandala, the Buddhist symbol of meditation. Borobudur fell into disuse 500 years ago. Europeans first saw it in 1814, when the English, headed by Stamford Raffles, were ruling Java. He ordered it to be cleared of jungle, and an early artist painted this impression of what he believed it was originally like. What it looked like, in fact, was very different. It was already in ruins, and when, a century later, the Dutch surveyed it, they discovered that the whole structure was on the verge of collapse. The circular terraces had slumped and buckled. The central stupa had split down the middle. In 1907, the Dutch set about repairing the top terraces where the deterioration was worst. But they didn't have the technical means to do so in as thoroughgoing a way as was necessary. And over half a century later still, the monument needed more work if it was not to collapse. The nations of the world contributed to the cost through UNESCO. Preparations for the work began in 1963. An international panel of experts was formed, archaeologists and architects, botanists to examine the mold on the rocks, geologists to look at the ground beneath. After a most painstaking and thorough survey, a long-term plan was prepared. An army of masons was recruited. Huge cranes were brought in, and in 1971, work began on the north and south sides. The leader of the whole team is an Indonesian archaeologist, Dr. Sukmono, who told me the cause of the trouble.
Well, the rainwater has penetrated the monument through the seams of the stones and also through the porous stones themselves. And that means that there is an erosion process on the core of the monument, which is actually a natural hill. And it is therefore that there was a sliding movement which resulted in the leaning of the walls and also of the saggings of the floor.
So that this floor that we're standing on now
Yes,
has sunk down.
Yes, right, yeah.
And the consequence of that was that this wall fell towards us.
Yes, that's right, yeah.
So this leaned out.
It is leaning out, yes.
So that unless something was done, the whole thing would actually fall down.
Right, yes, that's right.
And what about the stones themselves?
Well, these stones are suffering from a deterioration process, and it is again caused by the seepage of water from the core of the monument, which carries with it several kinds of minerals and several kinds of salts and all other kinds of chemicals, which attack the stones through an oxidation process.
And it also looks as though almost everything grows on it.
Yes, because of the moisture, of course, there will be a growth. And the dangerous thing is that the lichens, the algae, and all kinds of microorganisms are not only growing on the stones, but at the same time are also attacking the skin of the stones.
Yeah. So what do you do about it?
Well, we have made a special study on this problem for many, many years, and apparently the only possible way to safeguard this monument is to take off all the stones and to reconstruct it on the reinforced concrete.
So after the stones have been removed, the hill which the builders of the monument used as a basis 1,200 years ago is being reconstituted by a lattice of iron rods surrounded by hundreds of tons of concrete. Through these new foundations, drains will run so that the groundwater fed by the tropical rains, which caused so much damage in the past, will be harmlessly channeled away. While this work is going on the north and south sides, the east and west terraces are being meticulously surveyed. Borobudur contains about 1 million carved stones, quite apart from the plain blocks that form its interior. And every one has to be examined, measured, and numbered. Its damage noted, its need for special conservation treatment assessed. The upper terraces, restored by the Dutch, need little further treatment, but all the lower ones, shielded from the rains by roofs, are being totally dismantled. Beneath the carved stones are another 2 million or so plain blocks, and these too have to be removed. Each one must also be carefully numbered and catalogued. All the blocks, carved and uncarved, are stored in racks. The reference number, dimensions, original placing and storage position of each one of the 3 million has been registered in a computer so that the restorers can immediately find any block they want. They may discover from the computer that some of the carved stones were misplaced during earlier restorations. They may also wish to use one of the plain blocks from the interior to repair a damaged stone from the exterior, and will need to know where they can find one of an appropriate size. Many of the paving stones in the galleries had been completely destroyed by the jungle trees that once grew over them, so new paving has to be constructed using blocks from the center. These paving blocks are cut in irregular shapes, the better to withstand the earth tremors that regularly shake this volcanic island and which undoubtedly contributed to the weakening of the monument. A great deal has been discovered during all this work. When the first excavations were made by the Dutch around the base of the monument, they found 2 further terraces, complete with friezes, that had been buried, perhaps to shore up the base, which may have started to spread very soon after its original construction. These illustrate the laws of karma, of cause and effect, of sin and its inevitable punishment, of virtue and its rewards, and already they're becoming overgrown. Originally, there were 504 statues of the Buddha here. 43 are now missing. Nearly half of those that remain have lost their heads. The computer can register the contours of the broken necks and should be able to help in matching torsos with heads that over the centuries have been pillaged and have now been recovered from elsewhere in the island. Each has its own individualized facial expression. All must be carefully cleaned, and for that there is nothing better than pure water. Stains, patches of corrosion or concretions are meticulously removed. The original builders in the 8th century probably took several decades to construct Borobudur. The work of taking it apart, cleaning all its sculpture and reassembling it is likely to take at least 10 years and will not be finished until 1982. But then the monument should be able to withstand the tropical rains and earthquakes of another 1,000 years. While Borobudur is being taken apart, ceremonies that were once held there take place instead at Chandi Mendut, a small and perfect temple that was built at the same time as Borobudur and served it as a gateway. The monks from Sri Lanka who had come to plant the Bodhi tree also came here to worship with fellow Buddhists. Here in Java, dancing is still an appropriate way of worshipping and paying homage to the gods. The dance, which here is being performed as part of a Buddhist ceremony, originated in a royal palace. Borobudur lies close to one of the ancient capitals of Java, Yogyakarta. The Sultan, who rules here, still commands the reverence of his people to such a degree that even if he is not present, they will approach the royal pavilions in this traditional crouching posture. Here in the palace, the kraton, the stately, dignified court dances are still regularly performed and still taught. Today anyone may come to learn, and women from all over the city do so, the wives of cabinet ministers as well as those of shopkeepers. They do so, they say, because the discipline of the dance and the physical control it requires gives them solace and brings a deep pleasure. The movements of the dance do not emphasize and coincide with the beats of the music as they do so often in Western dance. Instead, they weave in and out between the pulses of the slow, stately rhythms. There is no program in such dances as these. The postures do not each have precise individual meanings. They're meant to be judged and appreciated for their grace and beauty alone. They should be fluid, yet totally controlled. Every detail of movement, every position of the finger or the foot is prescribed by tradition. There is no room whatsoever for improvisation. Yet a great dancer can bring her own grace to her performance and make it unique and unforgettable. The movement of the hands is much more important than that of the feet. Whereas Indian dance is full of leaps and pirouettes, Javanese dancers seem to cling to the earth, and many movements are performed crouching or even sitting. The men also dance, but separately. It's very rare indeed in classical dances like these for men and women to dance together. The teachers are men who have been court dancers all their lives. Only in 2 palaces, here in Yogyakarta and in the neighboring city of Surakarta, are there still teachers to give such lessons. The essential quality a man must convey in his dance is masculine strength. He does it not by flashing displays of great vigor or by extravagant gestures. Instead, he must remain totally impassive and create an impression of sustained and unrelenting force. When the lesson is over, all must leave the royal pavilion as they approached it, in a properly respectful posture. Yogyakarta, Jogja as everyone calls it, is far from being a museum town fossilized in the past. It's one of Java's busiest and biggest cities. But the past is nonetheless very close to the people. The temple mountain of Borobudur is less than 20 miles away. The Hindu temples of Prambanan, built in the 9th century, are less than 10 miles from the city center. This city, in the 16th century, was the center of a kingdom that ruled most of Java. At the beginning of the 19th century, the British conquered it. They named the main street after General Marlborough, and in spite of the fact that the British soldiers looted the Kraton, the people, forgivingly, still call that road Jalan Malioboro. In 1946, Jogja became the capital of the newly declared Republic of Indonesia. During the War of Independence with the Dutch, the Kraton was once again besieged. The Sultan refused to surrender even in the face of threats from Dutch tanks. He parleyed with the Dutch commander sitting in state on the top of the Kraton wall in full view of his people. Eventually, the tanks withdrew. The capital of Indonesia has now moved to the newer city of Jakarta farther west, but Jogja, and in particular the Kraton, remains the cultural heart of the whole island. The Kraton is surrounded by 4 massive walls, each a kilometer long, that were built in the middle of the 18th century. Inside, there are a series of pavilions, most of them open on 3 sides, spacious and shady. During the 19th century, many were decorated and furnished in European taste, with cut-glass chandeliers and mirrors. But the atmosphere retains the grave and gentle calm that is typical of Java. The wooden pillars are carved with a highly stylized version of Islamic characters which mean Allah is great. For the sultans have been followers of Islam for 500 years. Although the office of sultan in today's republic carries no political power, the ceremonials surrounding the sultan are still continued by his people, and he himself maintains companies of dancers and musicians, painters and sculptors, to fill his palace with visual beauty and musical delight. The traditional orchestra of Java is the gamelan, and the Kraton contains 17 of them. The biggest has over 30 instruments. Each gamelan has its own characteristic harmonies, and each its own name: the torrent of honey, the fighting buffalo, the bird of paradise, the thunder of flowers. Some of the gamelans are so ancient that even the meanings of their names are now forgotten. The dances they accompany tell an Islamic story. 2 princesses are rivals to marry a king, and eventually they meet to fight over him. But the strange birds that carry them into battle are not Islamic. They hark back to a much earlier time. They are Garudas, the mythical eagles that carried the Hindu god Vishnu through the skies. The princesses finally come to an agreement. They will both marry the king. The Serimpi dances, the most often performed of the Javanese court dances, also tell of rival princesses. Yet all the conflict has been transformed into a timeless, reverential, dreamlike calm as the performers enact the dimly remembered dramas of heroes and heroines who lived 2,000 years ago in a far-off land on the other side of the ocean. The dagger, the kris, which the dancers handle with such delicacy in this stylized, slow-motion battle, is more than a weapon. It is a highly sacred object imbued with supernatural strength. Some ancient and famous blades are so magically powerful that they will rattle in their sheaths to warn their owner of approaching danger and guide his hand in battle. The kris is also the focus of the Bedoyo dance. Originally, Bedoyo was performed only by small girls who were selected by officials of the kraton from among the children of the servants or from nearby villages and brought to the kraton to be trained. Today, the rules have been relaxed. Anyone who wishes may train for Bedoyo, and whereas once it was only permitted to be performed within the most sacred inner courts of the kraton, now it's danced in many places, including the nearby temples of Prambanan. But Serimpi and Bedoyo and the stately music of the court still remains remote and unseen by most of the villagers in the surrounding country, who must labor, as they have done since long before the rise of the sultans, in the rice fields that terrace the slopes of the volcanoes. Rice, and the technique of cultivating it in flooded terraces, was brought here, it seems, like so much else, from India nearly 2,000 years ago. Before that time, the people lived in the forests that covered the island. It was rice that allowed the population to grow to its present size, and with 98 million inhabitants, Java is one of the most densely populated lands in the world, and it is rice that still sustains them. But though working on the land takes so much of the people's time, it doesn't take it all. It was such people as these who, in addition to laboring in fields, also raised the vast temples of Borobudur and Prambanan. The effort must have been stupendous, and the price in human sweat enormous. There's a saying in this part of the world, the temple is finished, the people are ruined. Certainly, the centuries of effort that produced those marvelous temples were followed by even longer periods which left no monuments at all. Jogja, however, does have some industries, and some of considerable antiquity. Here, artists make the fabrics for which Java is famous throughout Indonesia and far beyond, batik. The technique was first used over 500 years ago, and it probably originated here. The basic fabric is a cotton cloth that, again, was originally imported from India. The Javanese speciality was to dye it with delicate, many-colored patterns. The artists paint the cloth with wax. This will prevent the dye from reaching the cloth beneath. Sometimes only a tiny line is to be left undyed, and then the wax is put on through the spout of this instrument, the tanjing. After soaking in the dye, the wax will be scraped off, and then the cloth is re-waxed to take the next color. It may take up to 15 days to complete a single cloth. Some of the designs are made for the exclusive use of the palace, and the most celebrated batik workshops are those that nestle around the Kraton walls in Jogja. Inside the palace, other artists are at work. These are shadow puppets made from buffalo hide. Whenever they become in the least shabby, they are replaced, so the craftsmen in the palace are kept continuously busy. The whole work is done in reverential silence, and well it might be, for these puppets will represent gods and goddesses. No stencils are ever used. Each figure has been memorized by the artist, and he must know up to 400 of them in order to provide all the characters in their varying ages and moods who appear in the shadow play. Each is painted in its own colors. Vishnu and his family have black faces. Shiva's family has gold. The leather is stiffened by rods of horn or cane, which must be steamed into shape. In the evenings, before the shadow play begins, all the puppets, those that will appear in the evening's performance as well as those that will not, are set in rows, their handles stuck in the cut stem of a banana tree. Each has its proper place. The bad characters are ranged on the left of the screen, the good on the right. For performances in the Kraton, A full gamelan accompanies the drama.
Iki lamun mboya tak tutup pedhut ing kayangan. Patih Mamang Dono bisa gawe obro markatan ing kayangan. Tekono padha semingkira. Ulun yang bakal nrenggalangi.
An oil lamp hangs high behind the screen of cotton cloth on which the puppets cast their shadows. The puppet master, the dalang, conducts the orchestra and sings all the parts. The grotesque shapes of the puppets date from the 15th century and may well have been given to them as a way of avoiding the Islamic ban on the making of human images. The stories the dalang tells, however, are Hindu, and the puppets themselves are older still. They perform not just to entertain, but to rid the village of disease, to bless a marriage, or give fertility to the newly planted rice. Such puppets were casting shadows here long before the arrival of Islam, Hinduism, or Buddhism, when the people put their faith in spirits that dwelt in the land and in their ancestors, spirits they believed that could be invoked as immaterial, transient shadows flickering over a screen.